A lot of people are confused by their financial life, not because they are irresponsible, because their situation makes no sense anymore. You can work consistently, pay your bills, avoid major mistakes, even earn more than you used to, and still feel like you're barely moving forward. That feeling is becoming incredibly common. Not rock bottom, not disaster, just a constant sense that real stability never fully arrives. You recover from one month, then immediately start preparing for the next one. There's always something waiting: a higher bill, a repair, a random expense, a subscription you forgot about, a weekend that cost more than expected. And over time, financial pressure stops feeling temporary. It starts feeling permanent. That's the part people rarely talk about. Because most modern financial stress does not look dramatic. It looks normal. A decent salary, a normal apartment, a few convenience purchases, food delivery, streaming subscriptions, some online shopping, a vacation once in a while, nothing extreme. But underneath that normal-looking life, there's tension. A single problem can still throw everything off balance, and eventually people start asking themselves a dangerous question: how am I still financially stressed after all this effort? The answer is not as simple as, you need more discipline. Because modern financial pressure is no longer only about bad decisions, it's also about the environment people live inside every day. And once you see that clearly, you stop looking at money the same way. 30 years ago, spending money required friction. You had to physically go somewhere, physically buy something, physically hand over money. Now, you can spend emotionally in seconds, while tired, while distracted, while stressed, while half asleep in bed. That changes human behavior more than people realize. Because when spending becomes frictionless, your brain stops treating many purchases like real decisions. Most people think they make financial decisions independently. But modern systems shape behavior constantly. Apps compete for attention. Algorithms study emotional reactions. Companies analyze scrolling behavior, hesitation, impulse triggers, and click patterns with incredible precision. Entire industries are designed around reducing the time between emotion and spending. That's why convenience became so powerful financially. Not because convenience is evil, because convenience removes pause, and pause matters. A short moment of friction used to protect people from countless unnecessary purchases. Now that pause barely exists, food arrives instantly, shopping happens instantly, entertainment never really ends, subscriptions renew automatically in the background while people barely notice. And because these systems feel smooth, people stop noticing how much money quietly leaves their lives every month. That's why financially stressed people often feel genuinely confused. They remember expensive purchases clearly, but they rarely remember the dozens of tiny convenience decisions scattered throughout normal weeks. And those decisions accumulate much faster than people expect, especially because individually, none of them feel important enough to question. That's how financial pressure becomes invisible, not through one catastrophic mistake, through thousands of tiny moments that quietly become routine. One of the strangest parts of modern adulthood is how expensive ordinary life became. Not luxury, ordinary life. Housing costs increased dramatically, convenience became normalized, digital services turned into recurring monthly obligations, social expectations quietly moved upward, and most people adapted without fully noticing it happening. That adaptation matters, because humans normalize environments extremely quickly. The expensive apartment starts feeling standard, the upgraded phone feels reasonable. Delivery apps stop feeling occasional. Subscriptions become background noise, and eventually people stop asking, does this actually improve my life enough to justify the cost? The spending simply becomes automatic. That's one of the biggest financial traps in modern life, not reckless spending, unquestioned spending. There's a huge difference between buying something intentionally and slowly absorbing expensive habits because they became socially normal. That's why financial pressure often grows quietly. Nothing feels outrageous individually, but the total cost of existing keeps climbing. And eventually, income increases stop creating real relief, because lifestyle expansion absorbs progress immediately. That's one reason so many adults feel trapped despite earning more than they used to. Modern spending is deeply emotional, much more emotional than people admit. After exhausting days, people want comfort. After stressful weeks, they want relief. After working constantly, they want life to feel easier for a moment. That's completely human. The problem is that modern marketing understands this perfectly. That's why so much advertising sounds emotionally therapeutic. Make life easier. You deserve this. Reward yourself. Upgrade your experience. None of those messages feel financially dangerous, but repeated constantly, they slowly change how people justify spending, especially under stress. That's why financially overwhelmed people are often not buying luxury products constantly. They're buying emotional relief in smaller forms, convenience after exhausting days, entertainment after stressful weeks, tiny comforts that make pressure feel temporarily quieter. And because the purchases are individually small, the emotional pattern stays hidden. That's important. Because financial improvement usually does not begin with spreadsheets. It begins with awareness. The moment you notice, I'm not only spending for utility anymore. That realization changes behavior quickly. Because once emotional spending becomes visible, many habits suddenly stop feeling automatic. Here's the scary part. A lot of people are not spending money to improve their lives anymore. They're spending money to survive their days emotionally. That's different. Coffee to function, delivery because there's no energy left, impulse purchases because the week felt heavy, constant entertainment because silence feels exhausting. And when spending becomes emotional regulation, income increases, stops solving the real problem. Because the pressure simply finds new ways to leak money out of your life. Think about how often this happens. You open your banking app for one specific reason. Maybe to check a bill, maybe to transfer money, maybe just to see where things stand. Then you notice the balance is slightly higher than expected, and almost instantly, your brain relaxes, not logically, emotionally. Suddenly spending feels safer. You order something small, maybe buy something you were postponing, maybe justify a few extra purchases because things are fine right now. Then a few days later, the number changes again. A bill clears, another expense appears, and the stress quietly returns. That emotional swing controls more financial behavior than most people realize. People underestimate how mentally exhausting unstable finances become, not because of one dramatic event, because of constant low-level pressure. You start evaluating everything. Can I afford this right now? Should I wait? Will this create problems later? Did I forget something important? That constant calculation slowly drains attention, especially when there's no room for mistakes. Over time, financial stress changes cognition. People stop thinking long-term. Short-term comfort becomes more attractive. Avoidance increases. Even opening banking apps can start feeling emotionally unpleasant after a while. That's why financially stressed people sometimes avoid dealing with money entirely. Not because they don't care, because mentally it already feels heavy. And avoidance creates temporary emotional relief. But long-term, it increases instability. Then the cycle repeats again. Pressure creates exhaustion. Exhaustion weakens decision-making. Poor decisions create even more pressure. That loop traps people for years, and many individuals blame themselves the entire time, without realizing the psychological environment itself is part of the problem. This part surprises people the most. Higher income does not automatically create financial peace. At first, earning more feels incredible. There's relief, more flexibility, more optimism. Then, slowly, life expands around the new income level. The nicer apartment feels reasonable. The more expensive routines feel justified. Small upgrades happen everywhere at the same time. Nothing individually feels reckless. But eventually the person notices something disturbing. The stress returned. That happens because people often confuse lifestyle growth with financial progress. Those are not automatically connected. Real financial progress creates more breathing room, lower fragility, more flexibility, less anxiety, more options. Not simply higher consumption. That's why some high earners still feel trapped financially. Their obligations expanded at the same speed as their income. So psychologically, nothing really changed. The pressure simply became more expensive. This is where financial thinking starts changing. The real goal is not looking successful. It's becoming less fragile. That's a completely different mindset. Because fragile finances create constant fear. One emergency matters too much. One interruption matters too much. One bad month matters too much. That's exhausting psychologically. Real financial progress reduces fragility gradually. You build margin. You create breathing room. You reduce dependence on perfect income flow. And eventually something important happens. Small problems stop feeling catastrophic. That shift changes life more than people expect. Because financial stability is not only about buying more things, it's about reducing pressure, reducing panic, reducing survival thinking. That's why financially stable people often appear calmer overall. Not because life became perfect, because fewer situations threaten their entire foundation. Most financial transformation is surprisingly unexciting. That's important to understand. People often imagine change should feel dramatic. A massive breakthrough, a huge investment, a life-changing income jump. Usually, it's much slower than that. Progress starts when money stops disappearing automatically. That's it, not temporarily, consistently. A person who slowly improves stability year after year usually builds a far stronger financial life than someone constantly chasing extreme financial resets. That's true for saving, investing, debt reduction, spending habits, and wealth building overall. Consistency matters because repetition shapes outcomes, not temporary motivation, not emotional intensity, not short bursts of discipline. And this is where many adults lose years unnecessarily. They keep restarting budgets, restarting savings plans, restarting financial goals every few months. But restarting destroys compounding. Financially and psychologically. That's why sustainable systems matter so much. Not perfect systems, sustainable ones. The modern economy is incredibly good at extracting money from distracted people, and distraction became normal. That doesn't mean people are doomed financially, but it does mean awareness matters more than ever before. Because once you recognize what quietly drains money, what increases pressure unnecessarily, what creates emotional spending, what adds value versus noise, your decisions start changing naturally, not instantly, but consistently. And consistent change is what actually builds stability. Not one perfect month, not one burst of motivation. Long-term financial improvement usually looks quieter than people expect. But over time, quiet improvements completely change the direction of a person's life. What's one thing you regularly spend money on that honestly doesn't improve your life very much anymore? Comment it below, and if you want more videos about money, psychology, investing, and building real long-term wealth, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.